Periods.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, periods.
Okay.
Periods. The bloody periods.
Right.
That was me being British, not talking. Anyway.
Oh, boy.
Okay, so women in the Bible, when they got their periods, they were sent out into the desert to sweat it out until they were done, because during that time they were gross and no one was allowed to touch them. Right?
Okay, well, the one part you got right was that no one was allowed to touch them.
Okay.
That was it.
All right, I may have gotten some of the...
the facts.
Yeah.
A little wry.
Leprosy, right?
Leprosy.
That's when they went out into the desert?
Yeah, that's when we had to be sent off.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Anyway, so why are you not allowed to touch women in the Bible if they're bleeding?
Okay, so...
Because that seems rude. Because that's when you want to touch them. Because they feel bleeding bad.
Right. So you want to comfort them is what you're saying. You want to comfort them.
Yes.
Okay. So let's go to Leviticus 15 because we need to bring some biblical context to what we're talking about here.
Okay.
All right. So Leviticus 15. Okay. So we're talking, I want to put it into like a bigger, larger context. Okay. So so if you can go read Leviticus 15, and in Leviticus 15, it talks about several different instances in which men or women are considered unclean.
Okay.
All right. And by unclean, to be clear, we're not saying sin, like unclean equals sin. All right.
Okay.
We're talking about ceremonially unclean.
Well, isn't that what it means in every other instance?
Is what, sinful?
Yeah.
No.
When they say unclean?
No.
Oh.
It's usually tied to ceremonial.
Okay.
Yeah. So verse 31.
So getting your period is a ceremony?
No, like considering them unclean during the period.
Okay.
Has to do with ceremonial laws.
All right.
All right. So, but anyway, Leviticus 15, 31 through 33. You must keep the Israelites from their uncleanness, so that they do not die by defiling my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law for someone with a discharge. A man who has an emission of semen, becoming unclean by it.
Mm-hmm.
A woman who is in her menstrual period, anyone who has a discharge, whether male or female, and a man who sleeps with a woman who is unclean. In other words, during her period. And so it's actually not just women that are considered unclean.
Okay.
I mean, obviously, women are the only ones having periods and menstruating, so therefore they're unclean because of that, and that is unique to them. But even men are considered unclean when they have discharges, as it talks about earlier part of of Leviticus 15, as well as the act of sex.
So if you have sex, you're unclean?
Yes.
What?
Yeah. And see, that's what I'm talking about, because obviously having sex is not considered like unholy or sinful.
I mean, sex is kind of gross.
I mean, yeah, I mean, you do have to clean up stuff, right? So, but that's kind of like and that's kind of the point in all of this, is that it's not just a woman issue, it's for men as well. Okay. And so, and again, the idea of unclean is not referring to them as sinful during that time.
How do you get unclean?
All right. So, all right, let's go to men first. Okay. All right. And so for a man, he is to bathe himself completely with water, and then he will remain unclean until evening. All right. So if he has an emission of semen, I can't read well. Emission of semen, he is to bathe himself completely with water, and he will remain unclean until evening.
So what if you had sex at night?
Then that's a good question. I would assume that they would be unclean until the next evening. So
sex back then was an afternoon activity.
I guess so, because then or let's time it as close till evening as we can.
Yes.
Yeah, and excuse me, but For a man, let me read, just starting the beginning of chapter 15. When any man has a discharge from his member, he is unclean. And it even goes on to say, any bed the man with a discharge lies on will be unclean, and any furniture he sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed is to wash his clothes, bathe with water, he will remain unclean until evening. And so it even gets into the fact of like any saddle the man with the discharge rides on will be unclean. And so, if he has any kind of bleeding at all,
we're talking about bleeding,
unclean.
Not semen.
Yeah, not just semen related at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
If his balls are bleeding, he's unclean.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And so, when the man with the discharge has been cured of it, he has to count 7 days for his cleansing, wash his clothes, bathe his body with fresh water, and then he will be clean. Then he must also take 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons on the 8th day, come before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and give them to the priest.
What?
All right.
How do you catch a bird? You gonna catch 2 of them? What?
This was commonplace. That they have birds to sacrifice. So,
Jerry, where are you going? My balls were bleeding, so I have to go catch some birds. Hopefully, I'm back before sundown.
Right, because if you're not, you violated Sabbath, and now you actually are in sin. So, and for women, when
I couldn't see, so I had to sit there. Good morning.
Oh Lord! So verse 19, when a woman has a discharge and it consists of blood from her body, she will be unclean because of her menstruation for 7 days. Everyone who touches her will be unclean until evening.
7 days from when it starts, or 7 days from?
Yeah, from when it starts.
Well, that's not fair.
Yeah, so everyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. So you can touch her, you just be unclean until evening. And
there had to be a long line at the showers back then in the desert.
Very, very long line.
It's a waste of water.
When a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days, though it is not the time of her menstruation, or if she has a discharge beyond her period, she will be unclean all the days of her unclean discharge, as she is during the days of her menstruation. So getting into all of this is, so you're talking about blood, you're talking about semen, all that kind of stuff, considered being unclean. I guess my whole point in all this is that it's not just we often frame it as a woman issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are they unclean when they're experiencing a natural rhythm of their body?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of becomes the issue in here. And so, and this is why culturally it is hard for us to kind of wrap our head around this, because for Israelites, like the life of one is in the blood. And so for them, the idea of bleeding is the idea of like losing life. Okay. And so,
because of it is.
Yeah. And
potentially.
Right. And so it's the idea of like losing life. And so that's why it's like, all right, so let's stay away then from the sanctuary. Let's stay away then from the temple. And again, I understand culturally this is hard for us to wrap our heads around.
You don't want to be bleeding all over the temple.
Right, because then you're making the temple unclean, or in this case, the tabernacle unclean, that kind of thing. So
semening all over the temple.
We definitely don't want that.
Get out of here. Go
Right.
take a shower.
Right.
And bring me my birds. You're gross.
You're gross. Yeah. Yes. If someone was doing that, that would be gross. So, and so, anyways, so I hope that puts some of this, back into a little better context, and just to remind a woman, if she's on her period, that you're reading Leviticus 15, it's not unclean in the sense of sin. It's just that is the way they would have understood it ceremonially you wouldn't want to come bleeding into the tabernacle where the Lord's presence was.
So dudes that jerked off a lot were just constantly unclean.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah.
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 Our entire country is unclean. All the time.
All the time. Everywhere.
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 Yep.
Well, you're yes.
California would have run out of water by now. From all the showers.
And there'd be no more birds anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
No. Where'd all the birds go? No birds at all.
We're a birdless society.
The pigeon population's going down. Guys, come on.